The billionaire didn't even look up from his phone. "That thing is junk," he said, "has been for 30 years. Marcus Webb stood 12 feet away, his 9-year-old daughter Nadia beside him, her hand tucked into his. The car sat between them, a 1963 Studebaker Avanti, fire red beneath decades of grime, partially tarped, passenger window cracked down the center like a fault line. They were at the edge of a private estate lot in Lake Forest, 40 cars lined up under open sky, priced and tagged for a weekend liquidation sale. The billionaire's name was Conrad Voss. He owned the estate. He'd inherited the cars along with everything else and had no interest in any of them. He finally glanced up, looked at Marcus, the canvas jacket, the worn boots, the 9-year-old, looked at the Avanti. "4,000, Voss said, and I'm being generous." Nadia looked up at her father. Marcus looked at the car. "I'll take it," he said. Voss went back to his phone before Marcus finished the sentence. On the drive home, the Avanti loaded on a rented flatbed behind them. Nadia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad." He didn't even look at it. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "I know." "Why?" "Because he sees what it is," Marcus said. "Not what it was, not what it means." She thought about that. What does it mean? He glanced at her in the passenger seat, her braids pulled back, her sneakers still new, her expression the most serious thing in his world. "You'll see," he said. "Give me 7 days." He had no idea how completely right that would turn out to be. If you've ever had someone dismiss something you believed in without a second look, stay with this story, because what Marcus does next isn't about luck. It's about knowing what others refuse to learn. Subscribe to Dadverse Stories so you never miss a moment like this one. Marcus Webb had been a restoration mechanic and collector car specialist for 19 years. Not the kind who flips weekend project cars for hobbyists. The kind who gets called when a museum acquires something broken and needs it authenticated. The kind with calloused hands and a reference library that took up an entire wall of his garage. He'd worked for a firm in Detroit for 11 of those years before his wife got sick. After she passed, he'd come back to Chicago with Nadia, 6 years old and devastated and small, and set up a one-man operation out of a rented bay on the south side. The work was steady, not glamorous. He kept the lights on. He kept Nadia fed and enrolled and attended every school event with grease still under his fingernails because there wasn't always time to scrub them clean before the bell. He was not a man anyone would have called lucky. But Marcus Webb was a man who paid attention to things other people walked past. He'd spotted the estate sale listing 3 weeks earlier, not the headline cars, the Ferraris and the Jaguars that were getting the attention. A single line near the bottom of the inventory. 1963 Studebaker Avanti. Condition unknown. No reserve. Most people skipped that line entirely. Marcus had stared at it for a long time, because he recognized something in the lot number, a private collection prefix that matched a name in his reference library. A name connected to a very specific chapter in American automotive history. He'd driven to Lake Forest not to browse. He'd driven to confirm one thing. And the moment he saw the Avanti's rear interior through the cracked passenger window, a leather embossed panel in a color that had no business being on a standard production model, he knew he was right. He'd paid $4,000 without negotiating. Conrad Voss had been back on his phone before the cash changed hands. Day 1. The Avanti came off the flatbed at 9 a.m. and Marcus went straight to the rear interior. Nadia stood at the shop entrance watching him work, not touching anything, just watching the way he'd taught her. Behind the embossed panel, exactly where he'd expected it, wrapped in an oilcloth that had survived 60 years of indifference, was a document pouch. Marcus sat down on the shop floor. Inside, the original factory build sheet. A handwritten note from the Studebaker production supervisor dated November 1962, and a photograph of a man standing beside this exact car, identified on the back in faded pencil as Raymond Loewy. Raymond Loewy, the most influential industrial designer of the 20th century, the man who shaped the Coca-Cola bottle, the Lucky Strike pack, the NASA interior, the modern locomotive. He had personally commissioned a small number of Avantis to his own specification, cars built outside the standard production run, cars that had been thought lost, scattered, or destroyed. Marcus sat very still for a long time. Then he called his daughter into the shop. "Come look at this," he said. Nadia crouched beside him, studying the photograph. "Who is that?" "A man who changed the way everything looks," Marcus said. "Cars, logos, trains, Coca-Cola bottles. This was his personal car." She looked at the Avanti, then back at her dad. "And now it's yours." He folded the document carefully. "Now it's ours." She looked at the photograph again, then very quietly she said, "The billionaire didn't know." "No," Marcus said, "he didn't." "How did you know?" Marcus looked at his daughter, this 9-year-old girl who asked better questions than most adults he'd ever met. "Because I spent 19 years learning things people like Conrad Voss never needed to know," he said. "Money tells you what something costs. Knowledge tells you what it's worth." Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded like she was filing that away permanently. "Don't go anywhere. This is where everything changes. If this story is hitting different right now, hit that subscribe button. Dadverse Stories exists for moments exactly like this one. Day 2. Marcus made one call. A woman named Claire Osei, senior specialist at Hartwell and Price, one of the 3 most respected collector car auction houses in the country. He'd worked with her twice before on authentication jobs. "I need a rapid assessment," he said. "I have something significant." "How significant?" "I need you to tell me how many confirmed Loewy commissioned Avantis exist with documented provenance." A pause. "3, she said. "Why?" "I think I have the 4th. Silence on the line. Then, "Marcus, where did you get it?" "Private estate sale in Lake Forest. It went for $4,000. Another silence, longer this time. "Send me photographs of everything tonight." He sent them at 11 p.m. She called back at 6 a.m. "I need to see this in person," Claire said. "Today." Day 3. Claire Ose arrived at the South Side Bay at noon. She walked a slow circle around the Avanti without speaking. Then she crouched at the rear interior and stayed there for 7 minutes. When she stood up, her expression was composed, but her eyes were doing something else entirely. She went through the document pouch piece by piece, the build sheet, the supervisor's note, the photograph. She held the photograph for a long time. "The chassis number," she finally said. Marcus handed her the verification sheet he'd already pulled. She compared it, set it down, looked at the car again. "There are collectors who have been looking for this specific vehicle for 20 years, she said quietly. "I know," Marcus said. Nadia was sitting on a shop stool in the corner, watching everything. Claire glanced at her, then back at Marcus. "We'll need full authentication, archival cross-reference, independent verification of the documentation. That takes time." "How much time?" Marcus asked. Claire looked at the document pouch, then at him. "For something like this, I can push for a fast track, 10 days to preliminary, but Marcus," she paused, "if this clears, and I believe it will, we're talking about a featured lot at the May collector sale. The reserve alone," she stopped, started again. "The reserve would be more than most people make in a lifetime." Marcus nodded like he'd already known that, which he had. After Claire left, Nadia slid off the stool and came to stand beside him. They both looked at the car. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Conrad Voss called it junk." "He did." "She let that sit for a second, in front of us." "He did." She nodded once, then she went back inside to do her homework. This is the part of the story people remember. Stay with us, and if someone in your life needs to hear something like this today, share this video with them. Real things get overlooked every single day. This is what happens when someone finally pays attention. Day 7. The preliminary authentication came back clean. Claire called at 8 a.m. while Marcus was dropping Nadia at school. He took the call in the parking lot, engines still running. The build sheet is original, Claire said. The supervisor's note has been cross-referenced against Studebaker factory records held at the Studebaker National Museum. The chassis number matches the Lowy Commission register we located through the Hagley Museum archives. A pause. Marcus, this is a confirmed discovery. He sat in the parking lot for a while after hanging up. 7 days, $4,000 in, one phone call to the right person, 19 years of knowing what to look for. Conrad Voss had looked at this car and seen junk. Marcus had looked at it and seen 60 years of overlooked history wrapped in oilcloth, waiting for someone who knew enough to ask the right question. That evening he sat with Nadia at the kitchen table while she finished her homework. He told her what the call said. She put her pencil down and looked at him. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for the auction." She thought about that. "Are you nervous?" He considered the question honestly. "No," he said. "The hard part was knowing. Everything after that is just time." She picked her pencil back up, worked for a moment, then without looking up, "Dad, Conrad Voss didn't even look at it." "I know. We looked at it. We did." She nodded, satisfied, and kept writing. The auction was on a Saturday in May. They arrived early. Claire Osei met them at the entrance and walked them through the preview. The Avanti positioned under specialized lighting in the center of the main hall, fire red and fully authenticated, surrounded by 40 other extraordinary machines, but undeniably the room's gravity. People gathered around it. Marcus watched them the way he always watched, steady, quiet, noting everything. A man in a gray suit stood beside the car for 11 minutes without moving. Marcus clocked it. Nadia stayed close, her hand in his, her eyes everywhere. "Dad," she whispered, "that man hasn't moved. I see him. Is he going to buy it?" Marcus looked at the man, the stillness of him, the hunger in how he looked at the car without touching it. "He wants to," Marcus said. "Question is whether someone else wants it more." The bidding opened at $2.8 million. It did not stay there long. Within 3 minutes, there were 5 active bidders. By the time it crossed 3.5, there were 3. At 4.2, 2 remained, the man in the gray suit and a woman in the 4th row who had not lowered her paddle once. At 4.7, the man in gray paused. The room held its breath. He bid 4.9. The woman, 5 million flat. A silence that felt longer than it was. The man in gray raised his paddle one final time. $5.1 million. The woman set her paddle down. The gavel came down. $5.1 million. Marcus stood very still. Nadia had both arms around his waist, her face pressed into his side. He could feel her shaking, not crying, just overwhelmed, the way she got when something was too big to hold standing up. He put his hand on the back of her head. Claire appeared beside him, composed but bright-eyed. "Congratulations, Mr. Webb." He nodded. He didn't trust his voice right away. After a moment, Nadia pulled back and looked up at him, eyes wet. "Dad." "Yeah. Conrad Voss." He almost laughed, the way she'd carried that name through every single day of the last week, filed it quietly, waited. "Yeah," he said. "He didn't even look at it." "No. We looked at it. We did." She wiped her eye with the back of her hand. Then she straightened up, all 9 years of her, and looked around the room. At the collectors, at the specialists, at the people who had just watched a car that sold for $4,000 7 days ago close at $5.1 million. "Good," she said simply. He looked at his daughter, this girl who had circled a broken car on a billionaire's lot, and filed every lesson away without complaint, who had asked the right questions and waited patiently for the answers, who had held his hand through everything. Yeah, Marcus said, good. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Dadverse Stories. This is what we do here. We tell the stories of the men who keep going when the world isn't watching. Drop a comment below. What's something in your life someone told you was worthless that turned out to be everything? We read every single one. The Avanti was acquired by a private collector and placed on long-term loan to an industrial design museum in Philadelphia, displayed alongside original Raymond Loewy sketches. Marcus Webb still works out of the same bay on the south side. The lights are on. Nadia is 10 now. She knows the name of every component. Conrad Voss never found out.